Good morning, Pastor Ron Jetter. It is Thursday, the 28th of May, 2020. On behalf of Immanuel Lutheran Church, Grandview, Washington. Boy, I'm recording this through Zoom so I can do a screen share today, and I look a little orange just because of the way the lighting reflects off of the green background here. But I wanted to look today at the book of Acts, as I have been doing, some of the great stories in the book of Acts. And one of the best ones, one of the really transitional ones, we've seen things that really change the shape of the thinking of the apostles. But chapter 12, for the first time, one of the apostles dies. And I think that had to have sent a shockwave through the rest of the apostolic band, through the rest of the probably the 10,000 or so believers by now. Now, remember, Stephen, the first deacon, was stoned because he was caught preaching in the name of Jesus. But he was a deacon. He wasn't one of the 12. Chapter 12, the book of Acts. About that time, King Herod laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church. He had James, the brother of John, killed with the sword. After that, he saw that it pleased the Jews. He proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the festival of the unleavened bread. When he had seized Peter, he put him in prison and handed him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending him to bring him out to the people after the Passover. While Peter was kept in prison, the church prayed fervently to God for him. James died by the sword. Remember, King Herod, who ruled that northern Jewish territory of Galilee, was also responsible for the imprisonment and death by sword, by beheading, of John the Baptist some years earlier. About probably 4 years earlier. This is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So timing-wise, it seems that it's now been about a year since that final meal of Jesus, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and then 40 days later, the ascension, and then 10 days after that, the Pentecost. We're in that waiting period between the ascension and the Pentecost. This coming Sunday, a few days away, we will celebrate the Pentecost, the coming of the Spirit upon the disciples, and the creation then of what we call the Christian church, or as they called it, the Way. So James has now died. One of the 12 has no longer counted upon the protection of God. Is it God's way of saying, okay, the 12 are now somehow declining in their importance? James at this time had been the head of the church. Peter was for a while, but historically we see that Peter and James kind of took turns, and then others did as well. I know the official story is that Peter was the head of the church because Jesus says, I give you the keys of the kingdom, which is why Peter's saintly symbol is a set of keys. Well, James's saintly symbol is a sword because he died by the sword. And so he was one of the really important ones. And Peter and James had been in a fishing business for, well, their whole lives. So it was probably as close to Peter's best friend as anyone. And they were traveling together. They were both there. James was killed and Peter's put in jail. Yesterday, we passed a milestone with COVID-19, 100,000 deaths in the U.S. And I wanted to just briefly look at that then. What does that really mean, deaths? Well, and you may want to ask, how many people died by the sword? You'd be surprised. The answer is, well, I don't know, not very many. Not very many at all. So what I'm going to do is bring up some statistics here then for you. I'll share my screen. All right, so let's do this one. This is from the Centers for Disease Control. And what it shows us up here, the total number of deaths, this is now 2017, the last year for which they're able to publish verified statistics. It takes them a while to get the statistics, verify them. I use these statistics regularly in my work as a hospice administrator. Very familiar with this website. Number of deaths in 2.8 million deaths. That translates to this death per 100,000 rate, which is an important statistic, and they're using that along with other statistics for tracking whether COVID is going up or down in each individual county and each individual state. So 863.8 deaths per 100,000 population. Our population is about 320 some million. So 2.8 million, that's less than 1%. That means our population is growing. It's not the case in some European countries where the population is declining. And for us, it's two reasons. It's both birth and immigration. Together, those have generally been the traditional reasons that population in the United States grows, because there have been a combined increase between birth and immigration that is greater than the number of deaths. So deaths, 2.8 million. Life expectancy, 78.6, slightly higher for women, slightly lower for men. If you're 79 years old, congratulations, you've beaten the odds. Infant mortality, 5.8 per 1,000 live births. It's one of the higher in the world and among developed countries. But we're looking at deaths, not births. Heart disease, almost 650,000 deaths. So not quite 25%, just under 25% of all deaths in the US were from heart disease. It's still the leading cause of death. When a doctor is required to fill out that death certificate, they will list the final cause of death, what caused the death, what was the disease that produced that death, and then what were all the underlying causes or comorbidities, that is to say, the things that contributed to that death. Cancer, 600,000, so that's a little over 20%. Accidents, wow, almost 170,000 accidents. Chronic lower respiratory, 160,000. COPD, for instance. Now, heart disease, accidents, and COPD were all candidates for hospice. At least those three diagnoses were, along with Alzheimer's and stroke. Some kidney, some liver disease, but especially heart cancer, COPD, Alzheimer's, stroke. These are people who were tended to be diagnosed as having 6 months left to live if the disease progresses as expected and certified by 2 physicians. Stroke then 150,000 almost, Alzheimer's 121. And there are other forms of dementia too that are included in the data. Diabetes as the thing that caused the death, it's down there a ways, but it's a comorbidity in pretty much most deaths by the time that people get up to that age. Influenza and pneumonia, so these would be upper respiratory. COVID-19 would be considered an upper respiratory disease. So 55,000 people died of pneumonia or influenza that caused pneumonia in 2017. This year, COVID will probably raise that by about, I'm guessing, around 200,000 by the end of the year. We're halfway to that number now. So it could be 250,000. It could become the 3rd leading cause of death behind cancer and heart disease by the time the 2020 statistics are put together 3 years from now. So is it significant? Yes, it is. It's ending the lives of people earlier than it might normally have done so. The saddest ones, though, the self-inflicted or the suicide, 100 or almost 50,000 of those. That's, again, one of those statistics we just hate to see. That is disease of a whole different kind. Now, this is the National Hospice and Palliative Care Report, and I'm going to go down to the page here. This can, if you do nhpco.org, you can find this yourself. Medicare beneficiaries. Remember, there was 2.8 million deaths. Of those, 1.49 million deaths occurred on hospice in 2017. That means that hospice was involved in over 50% of the deaths. And that means that the cost, for one thing, was reduced. But more than that, it means that the way people died was generally at home, comfort care with dignity with their families. And when we think about the COVID deaths, one of the tragedies, it's not just the death, because a lot of those, again, would have been hospice candidates. Some of them may have been already. People who in many cases would have passed from their underlying disease. They were already, for the most part, 80 or older, and we'll look at that in another one, probably tomorrow. I'll get further into the weeds. But there was two things really that makes this hard. Number one, these people were in hospitals, isolated from their families. Their close friends could not see them. In most cases, could not say goodbye to them. And one of the things we valued so much in hospice was families gathering together, holding hands. And I think of members of Immanuel Lutheran Church for whom I was present during my years at hospice, and I can't say their names because of healthcare privacy laws, but you're one of those families and you know who they are. It was such a privilege to be there. In one case, a group of us got together and we sang Christmas carols in the home of a beloved member who's now home with the Lord. And those were great things, wonderful things. These 200,000 COVID deaths that we're likely going to see by the end of the year will have been denied that. And the one thing that we knew from hospice, the one thing that I know as a grief support specialist, is that the way people die affects how the families grieve for a long time to come. So there's going to be some grief work to do with families whose loved ones were isolated and they didn't have that opportunity for those final conversations and for closure. Incidentally, the same is often true of heart disease when the death is sudden and unexpected, or for accidental deaths. And remember that there was a number of those. So hundreds of thousands of those. A lot of time people don't have the opportunity to say goodbye. And that is one of those things that complicates grief. But the second thing that's hardest about the COVID-19 deaths is that when it's in a large populated area, or even in a smaller area with limited resources, it overwhelms those resources. And having worked in healthcare, having worked alongside doctors and nurses and chaplains, my heart goes out to them. I empathize with them for the work they're doing, and pray strength and health for them, knowing that they really are putting themselves on the front line, that they are exposing themselves to this virus, and then in many cases can't go home to their family. So it's very hard on them. So that's the second tragedy of this. Again, died by sword, not in the statistics. James wouldn't have been a candidate for hospice. Peter, however, his story will continue. And that's all I'm going to do for today. Tomorrow, as I say, I'll get a little further into the weeds. I want to look at some of the statistics on COVID itself and see where we are and what it looks like for us as a church as we figure out how to be safe, how to be faithful, how to be church. Thanks. God bless you.